My name is Rob Brouillette. Not to spend too much time talking about me, although it is one of my favorite topics. Um, I think it's always important when you give these types of presentations to let people kind of know something about your background so they know what your biases are and where you're coming from, because there's lots of different areas of research and clinical expertise. My master's degree is in clinical neuropsychology. For those of you who don't know what that is, psychology being the study of behavior, neuropsychology is the study of brain-behavior relationships. So everything that you're going to hear from me today comes from my experience in doing neuropsych assessments on a variety of clinical populations, ranging from people who've had head injuries, strokes, attention deficit disorder. Spent about 15 years working over at the Neuromedical Center here in clinical practice, seeing people from ages 8 to 90, and obviously got a lot of experience in doing dementia and Alzheimer's disease assessments while I was there. And that's what brought me to this opportunity here at Pennington 4 years ago to start this program with Dr. Keller, the Institute for Dementia Research and Prevention. I always like to focus on that last word, prevention, because I honestly believe that we're not going to find a magic pill to cure Alzheimer's disease. We'll be closer to finding the Holy Grail if we can find some sort of way to stop the disease from ever manifesting. We believe that there are things that go on far earlier in the lifespan than when we start to get gray hair, or in my case, it starts to fall out. So something doesn't happen when you turn 75 and all of a sudden you have Alzheimer's disease. There's been something going on, something going wrong with the brain for years prior to that. So anyway, today's topic, we're going to talk about stress, and this is actually the first presentation that I've given on stress. Most of the presentations that I've given, this is a very new program here at Pennington. We've only been in existence for about 4 years. So a lot of the presentations that you may have heard from me in the past have been real general and more specific to Alzheimer's disease. But what we're going to talk today about how memory impairments can be impacted not just by dementia, but by things that all of us encounter every day. So the first thing that I want to do, as I do with all of my talks, is if you're in this room and you're having memory impairments or problems with your memory, raise your hand. Welcome to the human experience. Okay, so we talk about stress today, and if you walk out of this room learning only one thing, what I would like for that to be would be that you have a greater understanding of the impact that things like stress, anxiety, and depression can have on our thinking skills. Never underestimate the power of being overwhelmed to make you goofy, and never underestimate, the impact that has, that if you start to feel that way and you start to focus on it, it's only going to get worse. Okay, there's even actually a condition out there that you may or may not have heard of that's called pseudo-dementia. Has anybody heard that term before, pseudo-dementia? Well, what this is people who have become so clinically depressed. It happens a lot in our geriatric population. Maybe they've suffered loss of a spouse. Growing old is not for sissies. It can be very difficult. And they start to become so depressed that their memory starts to fail to the point that they may be misdiagnosed as actually having dementia, maybe having some form of Alzheimer's disease. And so it's important to rule out depression, because pseudo-dementia is a case where depression is so severe that the person will clinically appear demented on memory testing, but they're not. You treat the depression. If the depression resolves, the memory returns. So that's just one example of how these things go. But before we talk about stress, it's important, I think, that we work from the same definition of dementia. So what is dementia? Dementia represents a significant impairment or change in a cognitive function from a previous state. We all have our state of cognitive development, right? We're all very different individuals. If we weren't, we wouldn't have art majors and rocket scientists, right? We all think differently. We're all wired a little differently. God made us that way. So it has to be from a previous state. These impairments can be in the areas typically of memory, but you could also get impairments in attention and concentration, language, reasoning and judgment, and spatial skills. Okay, so you have to have that impairment from a previous state, but that alone is not enough to be diagnosed with dementia, okay? Because everybody in this room who is 70 years old or older will tell you that their memory is not what it was when they were in their 50s or their 40s, right? Are you demented? No, that's age-appropriate decline. It happens to all of us, okay? So dementia, change from a previous cognitive state, and the impairment has to be sufficient enough to interfere with social and occupational functioning, okay? When we say social and occupational functioning, at the earliest stages of the disease, that includes things like Maybe they're still working and they're starting to have difficulty at their jobs. Maybe they're starting to make errors in managing the finances, okay? And it goes all the way down to being able to feed, dress, and groom yourself, okay? So it's got to be an impairment that leads to this functional decline in what you're able to do on a day-to-day basis. So when we're talking about measuring performance in terms of memory, when you go to make a diagnosis of dementia, the first thing, or one of the first things that should happen is that you get a medical evaluation and then you get a neuropsychological evaluation, okay? That's what I do. I do neuropsych evaluations. What we do is we give you tests of memory and concentration, and we compare them to the norms for the age. What should a normal 70-year-old with 12 years of education be doing? These are well-established figures. And so we have to document that there is that, objectively document that there's that memory impairment. It can't be enough for someone to walk in and say, my memory's bad. Because if I did that, then I'd have to diagnose all of you with dementia, right? Because every one of you raised your hand. It's on camera, too. Okay? So when we're given these neuropsych evaluations, it's important that we rule out every other potential cause for why this person would be performing poorly on a memory test. One memory test might be that we would give you read a list of words to you and have you repeat them back to us, and then ask you 20 minutes later what those words were. See what your retention is like. We might test episodic memory. That would be to read a story to you and have you regurgitate the story back to me, and then 20 minutes later see how much of that story you remember. Okay. But as I said, things other than Alzheimer's disease or dementia can cause decreases in performance on these measures. Does everybody understand the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia? Because I get that question a lot. Dementia is actually what we're talking about here, with this decrease in cognition and decrease in functional capacity. Alzheimer's disease is a form of dementia. So Alzheimer's causes dementia. But there are other causes, such as vascular disease of the brain, Parkinson's disease, these sorts of things. Unfortunately, Alzheimer's and dementia have kind of become synonymous in typical daily language, but Alzheimer's is the cause. It's about 80% of them. But anyway, let's talk about stress and how it impairs our performance. What we have here is this is a well-known model. It's called the inverted U model of stress, okay? So as we can see, up here we have performance, whether it be physical or mental, right? But we're talking about memory performance here, so let's consider it in that context. And then we have arousal level from low to high, and then from low to high here. And as you can see, a certain amount of stress is good. In fact, it's important for us to be able to function in the capacity that we need to, okay? So if there is no stress, down here, consider this. Consider a 12-year-old child in a classroom taking a class that he knows he's not going to be tested on it. Is he listening? Does he care? All right, the teacher says there's going to be a test on this at the end of the week. Boom, up goes that stress level, right? Okay, so now he knows that he's going to be tested on it. There's a degree of stress. There's going to be consequences to his behavior if he doesn't pay attention and listen, right? Now, so a certain degree of stress, we need it to be able to function and to be able to have, that heightened level of attention that when y'all are all motivated by stress right now, you're here, right? Oh my God, do I have a memory problem? Let me go talk to this guy. Okay? So you're listening to me, right? All right. So we need stress in our life. Otherwise, this represents boredom, and this represents, institutionalization. Okay. But there gets to be a tipping point in stress levels that makes it to where it's no longer beneficial to us. Okay. It makes it to where I am in so much overload right now, I can't possibly pay attention to what you're talking to me about. And an example of that would be, look, we live in a multitasking society, right? And when you've got 5 different things going on, I'll use motherhood as an example because I think that fits this room. And you've got 5 different things going on, and the child walks up to you and says, "Mama," and you're like, "What?" You ain't got time for that. You're trying to do everything else that that you need to get done, and so that's where we see this. You become anxious, you become stressed out. The stress zone. This is where we start to see decreases in performance in people. Okay, this is where I'll give you an example, another motherhood example. When I was doing neuropsych evaluations over at Neuromed, we would commonly get women in their mid-20s coming in with complaints of attentional deficit. was a big buzzword, about 10 years ago, adult attention deficit disorder, right? We'll talk about that a little bit. And so they come in and their performance is not real good, but there's really nothing objectively wrong with their attention and concentration or wrong with their memory. So then you start talking, you say, well, what's going on in your life? Oh, well, I'm holding down a full-time job and I've got a 4-year-old and 2-year-old twins. And it's like, whoa. Next. You can leave because that's normal, right? But we live in a society now where, with the internet and focus on early detection, everything focuses on early detection. We're sort of conditioned to find something wrong about ourselves, aren't we? It's normal in the human condition to be stressed out. It's normal. It happens. But we need to be aware of it so that we can take actions, so that we can know, hey, all right, let me back up here. There are too many things going on. Maybe that's why, I forgot the pot boil on the stove. Because if you had Alzheimer's disease, somebody else found the pot on the stove, not you, right? Because you never went back to it. So let's talk about types of stress. So we have acute stress, which is sort of an immediate reaction to a stress-reducing event. This is what we call about the fight or flight response. Bad guy jumps out at you on the street, tries to take your purse. All of a sudden, you're in a high anxiety state. You're vigilant. Actually, most people would think that they're panicked, but you're not. You're thinking clearly. You're going up to the apex of that. Now, when he puts the gun to your head, you may tip off and not start thinking so clearly. But this is sort of the thing that gets us up. And so if you think about that in terms of memory, again, that stress level being necessary for memories to be implanted, think about things like, the death of a loved one, life-threatening events, life-changing events like the assassination of John F. Kennedy, the Challenger shuttle blowing up, 9/11. Your generation, most of you in here anyway, if I ask you, where were you when John F. Kennedy was shot, you can all tell me, can't you? Okay? My generation is probably more the Challenger explosion. I was a senior in high school. I know exactly where I was. I was in typing class. I know who was sitting on every side of me. I know my actions for the next 2 hours, right? Because I was at that heightened stress level, right? I was paying attention. What's going on around me? And so when we're paying attention, these things get indelibly printed on the memory, okay? So there's a reason. I mean, everybody likes to talk about, oh, why is it that, or they're surprised that people can recall that. It's no surprise at all. I mean, your mind was functioning at that moment at an optimal level of performance in that sort of fight or flight response, because as you think about as the events of 9/11 were unfolding and you were watching all those terrible images on TV, my son was actually turned 4 years old on that day. His birthday is 9/11. So I left my house that morning thinking all was right with the world. Gave him his little train, went to work. By the time I got there, I realized that it wasn't, So, and we didn't know, remember? I mean, now we know that it was just 4 planes, but then it was like, is there a plane coming this way? Nobody knew. And so it could tip over to panic, but most people were just kind of thinking pretty clearly, what am I going to do? I got to see if my kids are okay. I got to see if my wife is okay. I got to see if my mom is okay. Those kind of things. Chronic stress is something different altogether. It's sort of a lengthy time frame of over-arousal. So if we go back, chronic stress is when you're in a situation that keeps you over here on this end of the curve. Okay? You never really bounce back to that optimal performance because there's so much going on that you can't really manage it all. Okay? And, examples of that would be being overworked, as I say, burning the candles at both ends, and motherhood. Pure and simple. I mean, when I think about, my kids are a little bit older now, they're 15 and 13, but when I think about, some of the crazy things that I did, and it certainly, as a mother, you have more stresses than a father, I get that. But I can remember a specific time where I had gone to the refrigerator, and there was a lot going on. Kids are doing homework, the TV's on, Cherry's talking to me about how my day was at work, and I'm trying to get the kids fed and everything. And I go into the fridge, and I pull out a gallon of milk, and she says something to me. And I turned and I answered her question. And so then I said, what was I doing? I said, oh yeah, milk. So I go back, open the fridge, and I'm looking in the fridge, and I'm like, Sherry, where's the milk? It was in my hand. It was in my hand. Okay? So this is, when we talk about chronic stress, that's what can really start to take an impact on us and really start to make us feel like, boy, my memory's failing. I can't get it together. I've got too much going on. And a lot of times we don't recognize that we got too much going on. Why? Because we're so in tune to other people around us and what their demands are, right? I mean, a lot of times it's hard for me to step back and say, what am I not going to do, right? Who am I going to say no to? It's not going to be my kids. It's not going to be my wife. Can't be my boss because I need a job to feed my kids and my wife, right? So it becomes difficult to say no, and we find ourselves in these situations often without ever knowing, without ever noticing how we got there. And that's when we start to scratch our head and say, God, why I can't remember anything? Man, I'm getting old. Something's wrong with me. Maybe I need to go get this checked out. And I'm not saying that if you feel like you're having a disturbance in memory that you shouldn't go get it checked out. Don't walk out of this room and say, Rob said my memory is fine. I don't need to see nobody ever, because I didn't say that. But I'm saying the likelihood of you having Alzheimer's, if you're aware that you're having memory problems, the likelihood that it's Alzheimer's disease is small. Because people with Alzheimer's disease, if you can't remember, then you don't remember that you're forgetting. Right? It's pretty simple. But, it's an obvious concern. But we do our longitudinal study here. We have thousands of people who come in for annual cognitive assessments. And every one of them that sits across the table from me and my staff says, I have a memory problem. I have a memory problem. They're all motivated, by that memory problem. Motivated one of two things, fear for themselves or altruism for the next generation. It might be too late for me, but maybe I can do something through research to help my kids and my grandkids and the next generation, right? So let's talk a little bit about the nature of memory too. Memory is important, there's no doubt about it, but I am sort of on the side neuropsychologically that the most important cognitive capacity that we have is attention and concentration, okay? Because if you're not attending to it, you're not going to learn it, right? It involves both arousal and focus. So something catches our attention, right? But it's got to hold it too for us to be able to learn from it, right? And it's the precursor to all other higher cognitive functions. Memory, on the other hand, requires both retention, which is learning the material, and retrieval, which is accessing that material from the brain later when you need it. Classic example. I get this one all the time from people. I have memory problems. What makes you think that? Well, last week I was late for Johnny's soccer game because I thought it was at 5 o'clock and I went at 6. And then I was late for my bridge club because I thought it was on Tuesday, but it was on Wednesday. And then I went to the mall and I couldn't remember where I parked my car when I came out. Like, okay. So first of all, you just told me 3 things that you remember forgetting, right? I'm skeptical already. Because the Alzheimer's person doesn't act that way. They're like, is there anything wrong with your memory? No. She says there's something wrong with my memory. It's true. They become defensive. Again, you can't remember everything that you've forgotten, right? So another example, let's go back to that, even a younger person, someone maybe in their early 60s comes in and says, I'm convinced I have Alzheimer's disease. Well, Mama had it. Okay, well, how old was Mama when Mama died with Alzheimer's disease? She was 96, okay? So we're going to play the odds here that, maybe you got some pretty good longevity in your life and you don't have Alzheimer's. What makes you think you have Alzheimer's disease? Well, I always forget, where my car is at the mall. I go to a park, I go in at Dillard's, I walk around the mall, I come back out, I can't find my car. Who here has experienced that? Some of you are lying. A lot of you. But is that really a memory problem? I say no. I say it's an attentional problem. Because why don't you remember where that car is? Because you weren't paying attention. You got out of the car, you grabbed your purse, you pulled your list out of your pocket, and you started headed for the door. And you never stopped. You never learned where you left the doggone car to be able to access that information later because you weren't paying attention. Same thing with, the young mother example that I gave earlier. She gets out of her car, she's got a toddler at her legs, a baby in her arms, and a list of things on her brain. She's not paying attention to where she parked the car. Then she comes out, and what does she feel? She feels crazy. How can I not know where my car is? Wandering around the parking lot looking for her car. It takes attention to learn, and it takes attention to remember. And so that brings us to distraction and why so many of you in this room probably feel like you have memory problems and why I at times feel like I have memory problems. We have, I mean, some gray hair in this room, and you guys have seen a lot of change in your life, but just in my lifetime, this information age thing, the boom in digital technology over the past 4 decades, you know, and the question is, are we paying a price for that convenience? You know, I'm old enough to remember when you only got 3 channels on the TV station. I mean, on the TV, you had 3 stations. You had to stand up and go across the room to turn a knob, and you had to get your little brother to go outside and turn the antenna so that one of them would come in. You know what I'm talking about. And I didn't live in a rural area. I mean, so I remember that. And now you think about it, how many channels on TV do we have? And you think about something like CNN or the Fox News channel. That's crazy. You turn it on, there's somebody that's talking to you about something that's going on in Syria. They got the football scores going up the side of the screen. They got the stock quotes going along the bottom, and then every once in a while there's breaking news. You know, and then they split the screen and they got 4 people talking to you at one time. There's no way we can possibly attend to all that. There's no way that we can go through that. You know, the human brain has not evolved well enough to handle the amount of information that's being thrown at it. I don't have the evidence to support that. It's just kind of a pet theory of mine, but I think it needs investigation. And that's part of the thing. We're looking at that too. We're looking at stress levels and how much TV watching that you do in our studies with the geriatric people. But, you know, I believe that we've gone from the information age to the age of information overload. And this is called, you know, the increase in the incidence of adult ADD that we talked about, you know, that I saw clinically with younger people. You know, you don't get to be, you know, a successful 45-year-old businessman, you know, with graduate degrees, you know, without ever having been diagnosed with ADD. You know, it doesn't onset in the 50s. You know, it's something that's hardwired into you at birth. So that brings up the question, well, what is causing these problems? Well, it's information overload, I believe. We're also seeing increases in adults being treated for depression and anxiety disorders. There's just too much going on, too much for us to be able to manage. So I want to leave time for questions. How am I on time? Good? Okay. So what can you do? What can you do? Well, it's easier said than done. Minimize multitasking. Walking and chewing gum can be dangerous. All right? And I want to make this point because it's a rather simple example, right? It's something that we take for granted. Walking and chewing gum. You know, we do it. That's a basic form of multitasking, much more primitive than the types of multitasking that we do now when we're walking, chewing gum, texting, and talking at the same time, right? In our studies, one of the things that we look at is the impact of cognitive decline and the impact of distraction on walking in the elderly population. So one of the things we're trying to study and look at here at Pennington is fall risk. What makes old people fall? Falling is bad. Don't fall. You will die quicker if you fall. I mean, the mortality rates go through the roof with a broken hip, okay? So one of the things we want to do is to recognize what changes happen in the elderly so that we can minimize falls. And I'll give you this perfect example. We had this lady that came in, and one of the things we do, we have this nice long electronic mat that we have. For those of you who are in this study know what I'm talking about. It's called a gait right. We have people walk across the mat. And it measures gait patterns. You know, when we walk, we have this nice, normal, steady gait, one foot in front of the other, right? Unless if you get Parkinson's disease, you might start to shuffle. Well, the mat measures all those things. It measures how far apart your feet are on each stride, how long it takes you to get across the mat, all these things. Many more data points that I can't even imagine. But so we have people walk across that at their normal pace, just like you're taking a stroll in the park, walk across the mat, okay? And so they do that. And then we have them do it with a cognitive distraction, okay? So we have them do it while they're spelling a word out loud, backwards, walking down the mat, okay? Sounds tough, right? Y'all are all laughing like that's ridiculous, but think about what you do when you're walking. You do things a lot more distracting than that. What did we find? Well, we find that in general, I think as you would expect, when people are distracted, they walk slower, right? It takes them longer to get across the mat. What we didn't expect was why they walk slower. The reason that they walk slower isn't because they slow down their rate, it's because they shorten their stride. So instead of taking nice, long, healthy steps where my balance is secure, right? I'm starting to take these nice little choppy steps while I'm thinking, right? Now, is it easier to push me over if I'm like this or like this? Right, okay. So if we're shortening our stride, we're decreasing our ability, you know, to keep ourselves balanced. That's exactly right. So I had this little lady came in, and she'd already fallen several times. And she came in, and, you know, we have a very, very good safety record with using this mat. We have not had a single fall. A single fall with thousands of people going across this thing. This lady, you know, it's lined up in our office along a wall so that if they do, they can, you know, they can kind of catch themselves. But when it gave her that cognitive distract, I was fearful for her when she just to watch her walk. But I gave her that distractor, and then she almost took a digger, as we say. She almost went all the way down. And so fearful that I just stopped. We're not going to do this anymore. It's too risky. So I sat her down, tried to talk to her. She's like, well, what can I do to keep from falling? I said, when you walk, let's just walk. Let's just focus on walking. Because I know what she's doing, you know. And so I give her this big long spiel. You know, when you get out of the car and you're going in the grocery store, what do? We take walking for granted. We're on the next phase. I'm digging in my purse for my list. I'm getting a stick of gum. I'm getting a phone out. I'm doing all these things when I should be focusing on what? Walking. So I give her this long spiel. I'm walking her out to the waiting room. What does she do? She's walking out, and she goes to dig for her keys. Whew, boom, right into the wall. I said, Miss Smith, did you hear anything that I said? She said, yeah, I heard you what? So, you know, unfortunately, you know, as I said earlier, you know, aging is not for sissies. You know, and unfortunately, you know, as we get older, we need to revert back to some of the things that got us to be this age, right? Which, when we were kids, we didn't do a whole lot of multitasking. When we were walking, we walked to the next spot, did what we wanted to do, right? I mean, so you kind of got that sort of backwards evolution. So walking and chewing gum can be dangerous. So I want y'all to walk out of here knowing that. What else can we do? We can unplug, okay? Again, that's something that's easier said than done. Why? Because people tend to want to, I mean, there's no single greater motivation to the human than to be liked, right? For people to like you, for people to say nice things about you, right? And so we can't say no. We can't say no to people. So that's difficult to unplug, because then, you know, if I unplug and my mama texts me, I'm not going to hear the end of that, right? But it's so refreshing. I go, and every year I go to Manresa. For those who don't know what that is, it's a silent retreat in Convent, Louisiana, with the Jesuit priests. You go and you don't talk, you don't have a computer, you don't have a TV, you don't have anything. And it's the 4 most restful days of my year. And when you come back from something like that and you set foot back in the real world, it's a cacophony. I mean, the noise is just, it's unsettling. I mean, it's just like, why is everybody talking so much? So many needless words, you know? But so try to take those moments, you know, try to unplug, try to get, you know, even, we do it with our kids at home, you know, we'll have tech-free Saturdays, you know, like, you know, we're not picking up the electronic devices today until after supper, because you're 15 years old, and I understand that you just want to text Daddy from your room to the living room, but no, you're going to come talk to Daddy. So, unplug, exercise. Everybody knows the benefits of exercise. We all have our own stress levels. Just the act of exercising will do a world of good for you. I'm a very high-strung individual. I admit it. I know it. I own it. So how do I cope with it? I went and swam a mile this morning before I came here, because if I don't burn that off, I'm going to be in trouble. I'm going to be snapping at people, and I'm going to be over in that overstressed point where I'm not at my best. Sleep. We're a sleep-deprived society, no doubt about it, ever since the advent of the light bulb, okay? We didn't have light bulbs, sun went down, we went to bed. When did we get up? When the sun came up, okay? We don't sleep enough. Make sure that you're getting adequate sleep. And then make sure that you make time, you know, for leisure activities, you know. Don't lose sight of that. You know, none of us do these things on purpose, you know. We don't find ourselves in this state because we were like, let me take on too much and see what I can do to myself to get to an early grave. You know, it sneaks up on us. And so that's why, you know, it's important. And that's why if you take that day to unplug and just maybe kind of take an inventory of who can I say no to, you know, for the purposes of my own health. Because if I'm doing 15 things and it's too much, maybe I should only be doing 10 and I could do those 10 a whole lot better. And I should be preaching to the man in the mirror on this one, but anyway. So that's my talk on stress. We do have 2 studies here that I manage, the Louisiana Aging Brain Study, which is over 1,800 healthy participants over the age of 60 who get annual cognitive exams. We have the Joe Lamar Dementia Study, which is a longitudinal study as well for people with mild to moderate cognitive impairments and full-blown Alzheimer's disease. We are always seeking participants for those studies. What we do seek is to find triggers for cognitive decline by giving annual cognitive exams and measuring that against things like physical activity level, stress, sleep. And this is our contact information. So do we have time for questions? Does anybody have questions?